All right, cool. So we're going to talk about Python today. We've been doing JavaScript for the last week, and for the most part, during the pre-work, we've also been doing JavaScript, but we've introduced Python before, so hopefully you have, you've at least taken a look at it. And if you haven't, that's fine. Frankly, it's not that big of a deal. It sounds like a big deal learning, a whole nother programming language, but it's like, learning English and then learning English in England or something like that. The difference is not that big. Okay, so I'm going to focus on, rather than just give you the rundown of Python. It's a language. I could give you all the details, but that's maybe not the most helpful, and frankly that would be kind of boring for me and maybe boring for you. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go through an example. So we've done FizzBuzz, so we know how FizzBuzz works. We did it in JavaScript last week, so we're just gonna write that function in Python, and then once we do that, we'll concentrate on for loops after that, because for loops, I think that's probably the biggest common difference between Python and JavaScript. I think for loops in Python are a lot easier to use. We'll see some examples of just variations of for loops in Python, and then I'll also introduce the idea of classes in Python. So I'm just going to introduce it. You're not expected to know today, and then tomorrow we'll start actually trying to do some stuff. All right. So let's do. So let me zoom in. Can anyone talk to me about this name, the way I wrote this name?
So I think that's called snake case, where essentially instead of camel case, like in JavaScript, where every other word is capitalized, it's underscores instead.
Right. Exactly. My daughter is screaming in the background. I apologize. My wife has to handle a newborn and a toddler. Okay. So yes, so that is snake case. So in JavaScript, so both JavaScript and Python as languages are agnostic about this thing. But the convention among users is typically in Python use snake case. So words are separated by underscores and everything is lowercase. And then in JavaScript, you have camel case, where everything is written as one word, but the first letter of each word after the first word is capitalized. Okay, so that's not a big deal, but just to be aware of it. All right, so we're going to write a function called FizzBuzz. So we know how to write a function in JavaScript. In Python, the syntax is going to be a little bit different. It's the same thing, the same concept, but it'll look different. So can anyone tell me how I can do that?
You have to define it.
Okay, right. So how do I define it?
With DEF.
Okay. There's a keyword def. And then
name of the function.
Okay. So fizz buzz. Whoops. And then
colon.
Oh. Okay, am I missing something?
I think you need open close parentheses before the colon.
Yeah. So just like JavaScript, this will be the the little container for our parameters. In this case, well, let's go ahead. So do we need anything else? So in Python, when we write a function, we could just, we write function, FizzBuzz, parentheses, and then brackets, and then that's That's it. You have a working function. The function doesn't do anything, but it's a working function. In Python, we don't have this curly braces. So Python uses white space. So white space will indicate scope. So if you're in, so if you want to do stuff within this function, then you need to tab over once. And the tab could be 2 spaces or 4, as long as you're consistent. It doesn't matter if you use 2 spaces or 4 spaces. So you do something like this. So this is just something you can do to get rid of the annoying red squiggly line when you're just starting out. Pass. It's kind of like a dummy return. So this is a function now, technically. And how would I call this function?
Just with the fizz_buzz and the close open parentheses.
Okay. So let's try that. And how do I run this file?
Python 3 FizzBuzz pi.
Okay. It would be Python 3 if I hadn't set up my path or alias, depending on how you did it. So Python will run Python 3 in my case, hopefully in your case as well. And we'll do FizzBuzz. And did that work?
Yeah, because we're not returning anything to the screen, nor are we printing. So
Yeah, exactly.
we're unknown.
Yeah. Yep. So it looks like nothing happened, but something happened and we didn't get an error. So that probably means that everything was okay. So FizzBuzz here. What if I do this?
No, because I added white space.
Yeah. So what would this do?
Still inside the function FizzBuzz, it's calling itself.
Yes. Yeah. So this would be a recursive. Yes, exactly. So I could do something like this. Let me comment this out. Oh, and comments, by the way, hash. If you're using VS Code, the shortcut, command ? Will be, so you can use the same command, whatever language you're doing, and it will comment out with the appropriate thing, but Python uses a hash instead of 2 slashes. Like that.
Jay, without the curly brackets, how do you know where the function or object divides?
Yes. So that is a great question, and that's why we have these tabs here. So here's the function. So anything that happens inside of the function has to happen here. So you have to tab over and then you start writing. So all this stuff is like the body of the function. And so instead of curly brackets, Python uses tabs. So what's going to happen if I run this?
Infinite loop.
Yeah. So I'll just run it and then, okay. So when I did Control-C, but Python was too fast for me. So what happened was I got a recursion error. The maximum recursion depth exceeded. K1 told me about this error. We talked a little bit about, when we're talking about the JavaScript engine, we're talking about some of these things.
Does it have to do with the stack? You get too many pancakes?
Yes, too many pancakes. And you just end up feeling terrible all day. Wanted to have a special breakfast and the rest of your day is ruined. Too many pancakes, exactly. So Python allows you to eat something like 1,000 pancakes at a time. You can actually configure it. It's just a configuration variable, so you can change that. So there's no logical reason why recursion should stop at 1,000 or whatever it is. It's just Python's like, probably you don't need to do that. we'll just go ahead and stop at 1,000. So you could potentially, but what would happen is if you let it run, eventually you would run out of memory, right? Because each execution context that you put on the stack is basically an object. It's got information, so it takes up memory. So if you just keep stacking those on top of each other, you eventually will run out of memory. So we won't do that. Now, recursion is an important thing, and we'll talk about it later, but infinite recursion generally is not good. So at some point, you're going to want to have a condition where the recursion stops. Okay, so right now we have our FizzBuzz function. We're calling it, we have this kind of dummy return, which is nice when you're just kind of writing a function. So how does the FizzBuzz function work?
If a value is divisible by 3, it outputs fizz. If it's divisible by 5, it's buzz. And if it's 15, it's FizzBuzz.
Yeah. So I guess in terms of our, our function signature, we're going to need, we need to take in some parameter. So it'll be a number. And then we're going to be returning something. And well, actually, let's just say in this case that we'll just be printing stuff. So we're actually not going to return anything. Or will we return something? We'll find out in a second. Okay. So FizzBuzz, we got num, and then, so I know that if I get, I pass in 10, I want to see 1, 2, fizz, 4, buzz, and so on. I'm gonna have to do something a whole bunch of times.
Is it a for loop?
Yep. So one way of handling this, the typical way would be to use a for loop, and Python has for loops. But what about this num? Excuse me. So we can't just do for. First off, we don't use things like parentheses here, like in JavaScript. So we can just write it for I in
Range?
So tell me about range.
I just know a little bit about it. I'm a guess at this, so
Sure.
but I'll try. For I in range, would it start with like in parentheses? Would it be 1?
Yeah. So good. So we want to start at 1. So by default, range will actually start at 0, but we.
Oh, 0?
So by default, if we don't pass in anything, it will start at 0, but you
Okay.
probably want to start at 1. So we'll tell it to start at 1. And then
Okay.
it actually will take 2 other parameters as well.
The stop and the step.
Yep, exactly. So the stop is where you want it to stop. So num. But there's some things to pay attention. So pay attention to. So, be aware of inclusive and exclusive ranges here. So in this case, the stop is exclusive. So if I say go range from 1 to num, which is 10, it will actually go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So it stops at 10, but doesn't actually print 10. So we have to do num plus 1. And the third parameter, which is optional, all these are optional. The third one is optional, is step. So what is step? Cindy N.
It's where like instead of, you can either go up by 1, or you can go up by 2, or up by 3. Each time it's a different, each time it's the same amount that you increase the number by.
Yeah, exactly. So it's the kind of the unit. I don't know how to describe it better than that.
The bigger stair
Yeah, exactly.
versus smaller stair.
Yeah, do you walk up the stairs 2 at a time or 1 at a time? So the default again will be 1. So we don't have to, we could explicitly say that, or we could just leave it off and it will be 1 by default. And then Python to indicate that we are done with this this first line, and we're gonna run the body of our statement. Use a colon, and then again, this is going to be indented, right? So whatever I want to run inside the for loop, I'm gonna have to indent. Okay, so let me just try printing just to make sure that everything works so far. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So it looks like that works. What happens if I do this?
It's just going to print 10, right? Because the whole for loop will run, and then it's just going to print the value of I.
Yeah.
It's
So let me
gonna-
try. Let me try doing something like. I'll just do nothing.
It's
That-
gonna, it's gonna print x equals 0 num times, but then it will print I.
Yeah. So I'm just
Because
doing.
it's not in the for loop.
Yeah, I'm just doing like a dummy operation so that I won't get an error. So this will actually run. So this x equals 0 won't really do anything. We're not printing x or anything like that. So if you run this, then only 10 gets printed out because this has gone through and been changed, right? It ends at 10. And then once the for loop is all done with its stuff, it goes down to the next line, right? So if I want this print I to happen inside of this for loop, then I have to put it inside of the for loop. Okay, so we've got our for loop, so we can access all the values. So that's good. So now I think we're gonna have to have a bunch of conditionals here. So we'll start with basically 15. So we'll just use the modulo operator 15. So if, and then again, these statements are going to have the same basic, nice clean syntax, no brackets or anything like that you get with JavaScript. So if I again, so a couple things to notice. The comparison operator, there's only one of them in Python. There's only double equals. JavaScript has triple equals and double equals. This just has one. And then we have our statement and then a colon. So let me just try. Let's try that. So let's run that. And let's do something like 16. And we get 1 FizzBuzz. So again, the structure of this is we have our function, then we have a colon, and then we've indented to indicate that everything that's here is happening inside this function. Then we have a for loop, and we indent and we say that everything that's indented is happening within this for loop. And then we have an if statement, and we say again, anything that's happening within this if statement is indented. So we have all this indentation instead of curly brackets. Okay, and then we'll write the other one. So if I 3 equals 0, Sorry. So I should probably not just be doing if statements. I should be doing what?
LF.
Yes. So you know, Python has this handy little keyword to save you some like 2 letters of typing, or 3, I guess, if you count the space. So instead of else if, you just do elif. So if elif and then finally we can just do else. So let's see if that works. Looks like it works. 1, 2, fizz, 4, buzz, fizz, and so on. Let me get FizzBuzz at 15. So it looks like that works. So some differences from JavaScript. One, we have you know, white space is significant. So we use tabs to indicate scope. For statements, you end them with a colon, and then the body will go inside of it, indented. You have if and then else, that's all normal, but elif instead of else if. Yeah, and then we'll talk more about for loops in a second. So is there any questions about this so far? Is this blowing anyone's mind? Is this shocking information? Has anyone not seen this kind of stuff before?
This is my first time seeing it, so I'm very pleased that it's just minor stuff in between JavaScript and Python.
Yeah. So most, you know, basically any programming language is going to do the same things. There's going to be conditionals. It's going to be, you know, it's not necessarily 100% the case, but basically you're going to have loops, you're going to have conditionals, you're going to have variables, you're going to have functions, objects, things like that. So any, you know, any respectable programming language is going to have all that stuff. Again, with some minor exceptions. So if you understand what a conditional is and you understand what iteration is, then most of the work is just, okay, do I use curly brackets or a tab? It's just kind of details of syntax, which are easy to look up. All right. So that's FizzBuzz and Python. So I'm going to talk more about, I'd like to talk a little bit more about for loops in Python, because I think this is something that can give people trouble. So all right. So we saw in the FizzBuzz example where we got an actual integer and we wanted to loop over that specific, that number of times and do something, but we didn't necessarily even care about that value. So the basic structure of the Python for loop for, you know, variable in whatever, and that whatever can be a few different things. And depending on what exactly you're trying to do, you're going to want to make a different choice. So learning what these are the basic options. You use a list. So can anyone tell me what a list is in Python?
It's similar to an array.
Yeah. So it's, yeah, I would just say that it's an array. Yeah, you can look at the implementation, but for all intents and purposes, it's an array, and you can iterate over an array. Range, that's actually what we use. So that's going to give you basically starting at whatever number, ending at whatever number, and then incrementing whatever number. And then if we want to basically access the index of every item in an array, we would do something like this, or we use range. But instead of passing in the number, which we might not know ahead of time, we have to get it dynamically based on the length of the list. And in Python, we don't use .length. It's not a property. It's a function. And then enumerate is basically going to do something very similar, but it will give you a tuple, it'll be a complex data structure. It's called a tuple, and it'll have two items in it. One is the index, and the other is the actual value itself. So if you want both the index and the value itself, then you can use enumerate. So we'll look at some examples here. We have an example. We have a list, and again, we can call this whatever we want, but just calling it a list. And we have 3 strings in here. So like like JavaScript arrays, Python lists, you can have all of the same data type. You can mix data types. So it could have string, it could have an integer, an object, it could have another list. And then here, so and then this is just going to represent each value in turn in the list. So this can be whatever we want to call it. I chose name because it's a list of names. That seems like a reasonable thing. Oftentimes you'll see a convention where you'll have something like, this will be called names. This will be plural. And then it will be for singular and plural. So for name and names, that's a common convention. And then print the name. Can anyone, if you know, or maybe you can guess, what is this?
It's a format string.
Yeah. So what would the equivalent in JavaScript be?
String interpolation.
Yeah, exactly. So there's, you don't have to use formatting strings. Formatting string is something that was added relatively, not recent, but in Python 3. So I should say that Python kind of has 2 big versions, 2 major versions. There's 2, basically 2.7, and then there's whatever is the most recent one, which is 3.9 or 3.10. And there are some differences. So Python 2.7 is actually, I think, officially deprecated now, but it will still exist. It's kind of, you can always count on Python 2.7 existing if you're using a Unix machine. That may not be the case now or in the future, but so you can always count it. So there are some syntactic and other differences. If you're just doing very basic things, it's not important, but there are some differences. So just so you're aware of that, there's a chance that when you're looking up stuff online, you'll see older examples using Python 2. So print statement might look like this. So print something like that, or instead of being like a function call, it's just print and then space and then whatever you want to print. And there are also a bunch of different ways to format a string. Okay, just something to be aware of. It's just, differences in syntax. It's not really that important. All right, let's go ahead and run this. By the way, I should have asked this earlier. Can everyone see this? Is this magnified enough?
Okay. Yep, that's good.
Yep, it's good for me.
All right, please let me know if it's not. So I have Bob says hi, Sally says hi, Frank says hi, right? So notice that I'm accessing the value directly. In JavaScript, I mean, there's like, for of loop and so on. But this is very clean and easy to use. So if I want to access the value directly, then that's great. So let's look at using range, which we just saw an example of. So if I want to print all the numbers from, so what will this print?
0 to 10.
Yes, this will print 0 to 10. Right? And then let's say if let me keep this. There's a better way to do this, but you could do something like that too. So we're just using range, and then we're essentially using it to get the index value. And then we can use, just like JavaScript, we have this, I don't know what you call it, subscript, I guess, but you have the bracket notation where you can access an element in an array. Okay, so that's range. And if we wanted to, this is not really important, but I'll just show you this because Python has very good introspection capabilities. So range 3, it'll actually print out a representation. So notice that we gave it 3, but it prints it out as 0, 3. So it starts at 0, right? That's the default value. You can also see what kind of thing it is. Or what properties it has. So this dir function enables you to see all of the properties that are on. So there's a lot of things here, right? And most of them start and end with 2 underscores, which is a little weird. We'll see more of that when we talk about classes. These are basically built-in things. These properties and methods with the double underscore. But there are a couple other things like count, index, start, stop, step, stop. So contains is actually it is the in operator. So this in operator ends up calling this. So if you write a class and you include a contains method, then you'll be able to use this interface. So this is an API. So again, we've talked a little bit about. Have we talked about APIs? I don't think we have. Not really, but so API is a very general term, and it just means kind of the way you do stuff or the way you use this thing. If you want to use the in operator, then you have to modify this. You have to have a contains method. So you don't need any of that right now, but I'm just showing you that you can actually take a look around and see all the things that are part of this. So range. Let me try doing this. Again, this is not really important, but I'm just showing you that you can kind of, this probably looks like gibberish, and that's fine, but you can keep, you can, if you're so interested, just play around and see what you can get out of this. So iter is a method that, iterates. So range is an iterable. That's why you can loop over it, because it's an iterable, which an iterable means in Python that it implements this iter method. And let's see what else is there. Yeah, so that's fine for now. So that's not really important, but just so you know that Python has very good introspection. All right, so the third kind of for loop. Basically a modification of this one that you'll see is we have a list, and we basically want to get the, we really only want the indexes, right? That's essentially the problem that this is solving. If we want just the indexes, then we use range, and then we get the range of the length of the list. In this case, that's 3. So you can try running this. I'm not printing anything. Okay, so question: where should I, if I want to see all of the modified names? Well, first off, someone tell me what's happening in this line.
So you're getting the name at index I, and you're modifying it to include the last name Smith.
Yeah. So is this, we haven't talked about this, but is this a, am I modifying the original array, or am I getting a new array?
Modifying the original.
Yeah, so I'm modifying the original array. So this is just something to be aware of. So sometimes certain methods modify the original array, and sometimes you want to do that, and sometimes you don't. So I'm printing list here before the for loop, and then after the for loop, and it has been changed. So what happens if I do this? Well, so here's a problem that you're going to encounter with Python, because white space is important. So I copied and pasted code that used two space tabs, but in my VS Code I use 4 space tabs. So I copied and paste. There's 2 spaces, and then when I want to add my own line onto it, this is now using 4 spaces, so everything's messed up. So if I try to go back, now I'm stuck, so I have to use 2 spaces. And you are going to get problems where it will look like everything is lined up, but it's not lined up because there's some new line character tab, something is somewhere. So oftentimes you'll have to like reset. So you have to like go back to the baseline and then tab out appropriately.
Hey, Chad, you can fix that if you want real quick, because that is pretty annoying. It's in your settings of VS Code. If you go to your settings, you can add a line real quick that will not do that to you anymore. Because I told Tom likes to write in tab size of 2 characters. And I told him a long time ago, I was like, you're kind of screwing everybody that's doing the PEP 8 version that you're supposed to, nope, not that one. So inside the line 15, that section in that object right there, just add another line.
Okay.
And do editor dot detect indentation and set that to false. Now it won't auto detect what you paste in and change. It should keep it at 4 when you tab, but also
Okay,
in
cool.
in the bottom right corner where it says UTF-8 down on the bottom, you have to change that back. Oh, well, don't change it right now because you're inside a JSON file, but make sure it says 4. Where it says spaces is 2 in the bottom right. Make
Yeah.
sure that says 4 when you have a Python file open.
Okay, let me save this.
Because yeah, yours says 4.
Yeah.
All right, you should be good now when you copy paste, I think. You might still have to fix the indentation, but it won't mess up the whole line. It shouldn't.
All right, cool. Thank you. That doesn't fix it, but that's fine. So yeah, hopefully that will not
No,
break everything.
it pastes in however you copied it, but it shouldn't break when you do the backspace and tab again.
Okay. Okay, cool. So if I hit enter, it will be sensible. Okay, so what happens if I print it out here inside the for loop? What is my output going to be?
You'll have, it'll print the list 3 times, and the first time it'll change the first name, the second time you'll get Bob and Sally changed, and then the third should be all 3 of them changed.
Yeah. So we'll print 3 times. First time, so it's been added to Bob, second time added to Sally, and the third time. So it makes a difference where you put the print statement, right? You put it here, it does one thing. If you put it here, it gives you something else. Okay. There we go. There's that. All right, and the last kind of for loop variation I like to mention is enumerate.
Chad, before you do that last one, I have a
Yep.
question about indentation. There was a second there where on line 13 you were indented an extra tab over.
Yeah.
If you did that, then it just would it just not run that, since line 12 is not something that should
Yeah.
hold something?
So if I do that, it should throw an error. Unexpected indent. So again, like, even though this file as a whole is 4 spaces, as long as you're consistent, you can use 2 or 4. But yeah, 4 is the recommended. Okay, so enumerate. If I want to access both the value itself and the index, then I can use enumerate. So one difference is here, I'm going to have 2 variables because I want to grab each thing. Let me try doing this first. Actually, I don't know if that's going to work. So I'm getting the index and the value itself, the index and the value, and so on. Okay, so if I run this, not printing anything, but can someone walk me through what this code is doing? Someone who hasn't spoken yet today. someone like Anthony.
Chad, can we see the code? It's. Here we go. Thank you.
Are you talking?
I had my thing muted. I'm sorry.
Okay.
All right, so it's what's going on the code, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so if basically it's gonna look through the if statement. If the name is Frank, then it's going to modify every I to Jones. So only if it's Frank. Okay, so then when it goes through, Frank will get Jones added to it, and then when it's not Frank, it's gonna add Smith to all of them.
Okay. And so what is name here?
Oh, is that gonna be like a key or something?
So it's not, so this is a list, so there are no keys. Unless you, I mean. Yeah, so let's just say there are no keys. I mean, I guess depending on the implementation, you could argue that there are keys, but. So we have indexes, which we can't really see, but we know it's 0, 1, 2, and we have the values. So what is
I is going to be the value, or I is going to be the index, and name is going to be the value.
Yeah, right. So we're going to enumerate over this list. So every one of these things is going to get 2 values, right? Every spot here in this list is going to get 2 things. One is the index, the other is the actual value. And then we move on to the second one, and then we get 1 and Sally, and we move on to the third one, and we get 2 and Frank. So here this code is using both the. Now it would be possible. We don't have to use enumerate here. We could use something like this and just access the values using the bracket, right? But this is a little easier, right? We're doing it directly. It's not. Yeah.
Out of curiosity, could you print the enumerated list?
Like if we printed the actual, let me do this. So this will happen when you print out objects or instances of classes and stuff like that. So this right here is actually the memory address. You don't need to worry about that, but this is the memory address, and it's telling you that this is an enumerate object. You can make your own objects, but this is a built-in Python one. And we can see the kinds of things we can, the kinds of properties and methods we can use on enumerate with dir. So it's got a whole bunch of stuff, including iter and next. I don't know if you can see if we can call next directly. Yeah. So calling
again. Do it one more time. Sorry, do it one more time. That just so you could see what.
Yeah. So let's explain what this actually is. So this is what we're getting back, and this is part of the as part of the API that Python uses, when you have an iterable. So there's a next method. So I start with one thing and then I call next. In this case, it's the first one. And I call next again, and I call next again. So that allows me to access all of them in turn. So yeah, as Chris was saying, if we call it again here, then we'll get, sorry, I need to not run my code again, but actually write this line again. This may not do what I want it to do. Yes, so I'm gonna have to assign this to a value real quick. So just so I'm iterating over the same thing, I save it here as a variable, the enumerated list, and then I call next, which is basically like one loop, right? This is like the first run of the for loop. And then this is like running the for loop again. And I get the next thing, and I can run it a third time. And if I run it a fourth time, I will get an error, actually. This is an expected error, so stop iteration. That's how Python knows that, the for loop is done. So it handles this error gracefully, and it's not really a problem. But this is like, this under the hood is kind of what your for loop is actually doing. You don't really need to know that right now, but I think it's interesting. So let me summarize the basics here. So for loops, you have basically 4 options for what you loop over. Sorry, am I cutting out?
No.
Okay. So you have basically 4 options for what you can iterate over. You can iterate over the list itself if you want to just grab the actual values. You can iterate over a range if you know the number. You can also iterate over range if you have a list and you want to iterate over every item in the list based on the length. And you can use enumerate if you kind of want to do both. If you want to access the actual value itself and the index. Are there questions about that? Okay, if not, then why don't we take a 5-minute break and we'll come back and I'll just give you a quick introduction to objects.
Well, a class is basically a representation of some object.
Yes,
that's vague, but a class it can represent just about anything, right? So
yeah, it's kind of like, I like to think of it as like a blank form. So if you want to fill out your taxes, for example, which I still haven't done. You fill out your taxes, you get a form. Like everyone gets the same form, but when I fill it out, it ends up becoming my form. So I create a unique, instance of this form, but the basic structure and the kind of information that it contains is, determined by someone else. But when I fill it out, I supply my own information, and I can, I can kind of use the form. So it's difficult to understand. It's difficult to understand what that means. just in the abstract, but we'll see lots of examples. So being able to understand what a class is and being able to make them, and then you create instances based on that class is important. And we're going to I'm going to try to hammer that because it's just a basic programming concept, and we'll see it in Django quite a bit. So what is the point of creating a class? It's basically so we don't end up repeating ourselves. So the general coding principle, don't repeat yourself. So if you find yourself writing the same line or lines over and over and over again in your code, that's a good sign that you're doing something wrong. Maybe you want to think about pulling that stuff out, maybe putting it in its own function. Then you can call that function wherever you need that specific logic. It also works with objects. So if I have a tax form, I don't just I kind of know what I want to expect when someone fills out their tax form, so I include that information in the form itself. And that way I don't have to, everyone who fills out the tax form doesn't have to write name and then write their actual name and then write, whatever else tax forms have, right? So it just saves some work. So what I'm going to do is write a class. So the situation is you are, you own a bookstore, and your inventory system, you have to represent books somehow, right? So you have a whole bunch of books, and all of your books need to be represented in your in your program. So you have a couple ways of doing that. One is we could just make an object, right? So let's say we have a book. Someone give me the name of the book.
A Tale of Two Cities.
Okay. Really like those underscores. Tale of Two.
Just so you know, you're not sharing your screen.
Oh, sorry about that. Thank you. Okay, A Tale of Two Cities. And then let's say this is an object. How could we, what kinds of things would our Tale of Two Cities book need to have?
A name and an author.
Okay, so we'll have title and author. We'll just keep it simple. So title.
This isn't JavaScript.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
Okay. I saw the brackets. I was waiting.
Bracket, yeah. So objects actually do need brackets.
So you're still using curly brackets in Python too. It's just there's certain requirements.
Yes.
Okay.
So for an object, use brackets. For expressions like for loops and if statements and so on, you don't use brackets.
Perfect.
Or curly braces. So what Chris was pointing out is that your keys basically need to be strings. So in JavaScript, you could just write title here without quotes. It'll be fine. In Python, you need to put quotes around it.
Just for the terminology difference, you keep saying object, right? It's a JavaScript term for what you're making right now. Just know that in Python land, this object is called a dictionary. So I know Chad is going to keep saying object because it's a habit, most likely.
Thank
but
you.
Just know when he says object, he's really talking about a Python dictionary. Because if you ever try to like Google Python object, it's going to give you something much different.
Yeah,
it's going to give you a class object, which is a different thing. But just for the sake of the example he's doing right now, because it's really easy to mess up terminology when you're jumping between languages. So that's all.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's same thing with like lists and arrays, dictionaries and objects. Basically the same thing, but different names.
And then one other question: can you use single quotes, or does it have to be double quotes?
I think you can use single quotes. So title and who were the Tale of Two Cities?
Charles Dickens.
Thank you. Okay, so I think this works. So let's just try printing it out. So it looks like it works. And then what if I just want to print out the title?
Say just print quotation marks, single quotes title. That work?
So say that again.
Just instead of a tale of two cities, can you just put the word title in there? With quote marks?
Like this?
Yes.
I mean, yeah, that will print the string title, but I want to print this.
Oh, that won't print the title?
No.
Would you do a tale of two cities dot title? Would it?
Okay, let's try that.
Or would it have to be, okay.
Okay, so there's a couple, again, minor issues with the syntax. So if this were, if title were a method, then you could access it this way. So
Has
here-
to be,
yeah.
brackets with quotation marks, okay.
So again, these are minor differences, but basically the same stuff. So you have an object or a dictionary, you have key value pairs, and you can access the values through, object at key. Or dictionary at key. Okay. And then, okay, so that's great. So I have a Tale of Two Cities, and then someone give me another book.
Hop on Pop.
Okay, I read that one a lot. Hop on Pop. And we'll do title. Like that, and then I know who wrote this one. Okay. So I think that works. So does anyone see a problem with this? Yeah.
You're missing an equal sign after your
Thank
name
you.
of
Thank
your
you very much. Does anyone see another problem with this?
if you have to keep writing the dictionaries individually like that, you might end up with different keys and values in different places, or some of the keys and values might be different from each other or missing compared to the others.
Okay. Yeah, so that's definitely, so one is introducing human error, because I'm typing title and author a whole bunch of times, and maybe one time I misspell it or capitalize something when I shouldn't have, or whatever. So that's, well, one problem is, it's more vulnerable to human error. Another problem is that I'm repeating myself, right? Every one of these book objects is going to have a title and an author, but I have to, explicitly write that every single time for every single one. So it's like I'm starting from scratch every time. So there is a better way to handle a situation like this. If I want to create a whole bunch of similar kinds of objects, I can create a class. So I create a class that describes what a book should be, and then I can create a whole bunch of book instances based on that class. So in Python, in order to create a class, use the keyword class. And then the convention is capitalize. You capitalize the class name. And then a colon. And then this next part will look a little weird, but classes can have methods in them. So functions that are associated with a class. And so we create a method with the def keyword, and then this is a built-in thing. So we're gonna, you don't need to know the details here, but in it. And again, just kind of ignore these details. We'll talk about this more tomorrow in the coming days. But here I'm gonna list all of the properties that I want a book to have, basically. So in our case, we want books to have titles and authors. So title, author, and this is a method. So put the colon on there. And then we do, again, this will seem strange, but just bear with me for a second. Okay, so what I've done here, and again, we'll talk about this more in the coming days. But what I've done here is I've basically created a blueprint for a book. So any given book is going to follow this, pattern. It's going to have a title and an author. This init function, again, this is a built-in function. That's why it has the 2 underscores. Sometimes called dunder methods, as in double underscore. So dunder methods. So when you create an instance, when you create an actual book, not just book with a capital B, but a lowercase b, when you create an individual book, this method will run and it will assign these properties. So again, that will sound very strange, but this is just a first exposure. So I'm going to do this. So Tale of Two Cities. Now, instead of having to write out the whole thing, we'll do book. And we do title and author, yeah. So we'll pass in the title, and then we'll pass in the author. And then for hop on pop, we'll do the same thing. And I'll explain this in a second. Okay, so this line is the equivalent of this, and this line is the equivalent of this, basically. So I create an instance of book, and I pass it in these 2 values, which are required by my init method. So now, when I create an instance of book, this particular book, A Tale of Two Cities, is going to have a title and an author. And this book, Hop on Pop, will also have a particular title and an author. So we can take a look at that. So first off, let's print the object itself, the instance itself. So we get this bizarre thing. Again, this is the memory address, which we don't really need to worry about. But it's telling me that it's a book object. Oops. A book object. So it's an object created from this book class. And I can access the title. think you can, let me see if you can.
It's gonna yell at you.
Okay. So you can't do that. But yeah, so you can access the properties here. You can also access the author. Charles Dickens. And the same thing is true for our other instance. So what we've done is we've basically put all of the boilerplate that we need for any given book object, and we put it into a class. And then we create an instance, like an actual specific object that will have, unique, doesn't have to be unique, but it will basically have unique values for the properties here. Are there any questions about that?
Would you still call these two variables, the tale of two cities and hop on pop, would you still call them dictionaries?
They're, I don't know if you would call them dictionaries. They're instances of the class. Essentially, they are objects or dictionaries, but
one of the reasons why I ask is because I notice with dictionaries, to access one of the things that the variables or whatever that you put into the dictionary, you have to put it in the brackets. You can't use .author.
Right.
And
so,
with this, it's the opposite.
Yeah. So I would call these instances of the class, but so not every this happens in other contexts as well, where you have a data structure that's basically the same thing but a little bit different, and so not every method will work the same way.
I have a question, Chad. How was in line 13 the word self? How was that derived from lines 1 through 9 when you have title and author?
Yeah.
1 through 9. How was that derived from the word self derived from lines 1 through 9?
Yeah. So we'll talk about this more in the coming days, but self it basically refers to the given instance, and we can talk more about how the mechanics work with self, but it's like this in JavaScript.
Okay.
It's like just a generic reference to the particular instance. So in this case, when we create a tale of two cities, this instance, self will refer to a tale of two cities. So it's a tale of two cities .title and the tale of two cities .author. Whereas when we create the hop on pop instance, self is the hop on pop instance.
It's really hard. It's really hard to go in depth about what those things are this early on, because it's you have to go start digging into object-oriented Python, but y'all aren't ready to dive that deep into that just yet. So it's really hard to talk about instances and stuff, but it's going to blow your mind later when you find out that everything above from line 1 to 9, those are instances. Those are instances of a dictionary class. So somewhere in Python, there's a class called DICT, dict, for dictionary, short for dictionary. Those are instances of that class. So Python defined classes somewhere else that's built in. So you're going to find out later everything is an instance, but everything in Python is an object instance. Well, everything that you end up using, but it's really hard to go in depth this early, but you're definitely going to touch on Python stuff. That's why Chad is carefully stepping on his words right now. It's because it's such a depthful topic right now.
Yeah, it is very interesting, and I think it's cool, but yeah, I don't want to go into it now, but I just want to give you an initial exposure, and then so this is a freebie. You can just forget all about it and move on with your life, and then tomorrow we'll start trying to create, we'll start trying to make objects or instances of classes tomorrow. But it's a bit weird. I don't want to talk too much about objects or object-oriented programming, but yeah. So consider this your first exposure, and we'll move on from there. So let me stop sharing.